All right. So we're gonna get this show on the road. I'm the see. I got to give Dr. Jensen and Dr. Rockour credit. They have me come up first to make sure all the technology works, and then they asked me to introduce all the important people. So inevitably, I'm going to miss somebody, and then it's not my fault and not theirs. And that's why both of them have been president of MedChi. So Dr. Rockour is the past president of MedChi. Dr. Jensen's the past president of MedChi. We also have with us Dr. Lowentritt, who will be president of MedChi in about 10 days, exactly, I think 10 days, at our House of Delegates. Dr. Lowentritt, yeah, there you go. So congratulations. And I think that's all our MedChi presidents that I'm required to introduce. Oh, Tyler Semmett. How can I forget Dr. Semmett? Dr. Semmett is actually not only a MedChi president, I think he was the first osteopath to be president of MedChi, which is pretty cool as well. And one of my early presidents when I got to be CEO. So you are at MedChi, the Maryland State Medical Society, the foremost advocate for physicians, patients, and the public health of Maryland. And thank you to those of you who are here on Zoom, as well as the folks in the audience today. And my main responsibility is to have Dr. Rockour come up, but I did want to quickly just note that not only are we here talking about music and art, we're in this beautiful building that was built kind of at the direction of Sir William Osler, one of the four founders of Hopkins, whose picture is here, and you see his stuff. And we also have Welch back here too. So we have a couple of Hopkins greats sitting in the room. And you think about Osler, and you think about all the incredible history that's here. And it's so exciting that we're having this soft opening of the museum, where you can see that we've got the paintings set appropriately. We've opened up some rooms with some exhibits. And I just want to thank our building manager, Lloyd McKeith-Cleaves, who worked his butt off and dealt with contractors to make improvements and clean things up over the last few months. And I also want to recognize and thank Meg. Where's Meg? Can you come in, Meg, and take a round of applause? So Meg is our historian, and she's the one who does the blog spots and is the narrator of the videos that you have to watch in the back room or watch them online. And she really has worked very hard getting all this stuff together. And really, it's been a pleasure. I think I've driven her crazy over the last few weeks. I'm like, when is it going to be done? When's it going to be done? And when's it going to be done? She said, don't worry, Gene, it'll all be done. And it is. So we're getting there, and we're really excited about it. We'd like all your help as we go forward. But tonight is not about the museum. It's something we're proud of and we're excited about. Tonight is about music and medicine. And you know, William Osler said the practice of medicine is not an art, not a trade, a calling, but a business, a calling to which your heart will be exercised equally with your head. So medicine and music are not that far apart. So it's kind of cool that we're going to be talking about. So without further ado, I'm going to call up one of my favorite past presidents of MedChi from Montgomery County, Dr. Rockour, who is going to tell you a little bit about the Center for Healthy Maryland and keep the show on the road. Thank you, Dr. Rockour.
Thank you. Thank you, Gene. I'm Dr. Stephen Rockour. I'm the chair of the Center for Healthy Maryland, the foundation of MedChi. I'd like to thank every one of you for coming to see us and joining us tonight for the Hunt Lecture and the opening of Phase 2 of the MedChi Museum of Maryland Medical History. I do want to call out two people who are very important for the center. Number one is Debbie Chevarazzi. Debbie has been the CEO of the center for many, many years and is resigning as of November 1. And Alan Crowder, who is our new CEO, coming in November 1. So I want to thank you. So, talking about the museum, we have recently added more than 300 historical medical books, including some from the collections of Dr. Upton Scott, our first president, and from Dr. John Archer, the first person to receive a medical degree in America. Additionally, we are showcasing our historic medical chest, reputedly from the Battle of Waterloo from 1815, and once allegedly belonging to Napoleon's personal physician. I hope you'll take some time to make your way after the wonderful lecture we're about to hear back to the rare book room and the video room and watch some of the videos now that they're working again after I broke it earlier this evening. Yeah, took me a little bit to get it back getting going. And watch the videos which trace the history of MedChi even prior to our charter of 1799. Thank you again for joining us this evening. I am now pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, the chair of the History of Medicine Committee, Dr. Alan Jensen. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene and Steve, and welcome to all of you. Thanks for being with us. It's welcome to not only MedChi, but as you heard, the museum, and to this wonderful lecture, and to the Thomas Hunt Memorial Lecture. It's good to see old and new friends. It's good to see some folks from outside MedChi. You outsiders are welcome to see our place and come to our museum whenever you like. Many of you here knew Tom Hunt, who is a gem, a stalwart of the community and a model for physicians, and really a true friend. He served in the Navy in World War II, received his MD degree from Maryland, did his orthopedic residency at Hopkins, and had a decades-long practice right down here in downtown Baltimore. He was president of the Baltimore City Medical Society, the Maryland Orthopedic Association, and the University of Maryland Alumni Association. He was considered the unofficial historian of Maryland medicine. We had nearby offices, and when we go to meetings together, we frequently rode together. And as we rode by, he would point out the location of Oster's house and Kelly's house and all the other famous Baltimore and Maryland physicians. He received the U of Maryland Alumni Distinguished Award, Service Award, and the Christopher Spirit Award for Community Service, along with Mother Teresa. For 40 years, without fanfare, he'd take frequent trips to serve patients at the Allegheny County League for Crippled Children. He was mostly dedicated to his family, many of whom are with us tonight, and we always welcome you. You're glad you were to join us. His son, Jamie, also is a member of our History of Maryland Medicine Committee, and many of you remember he actually gave our lecture last year on Mount Vernon and medicine. And again, welcome to all the family members. You're always welcome. Thanks again all for coming. I'd also like to thank Meg Fielding for all her work, and Josie Fuller to manage all the stuff here. Now I'd also make another introduction, as important. It's an honor to welcome this year's Hunt Lecture, a friend, Dr. Sarah Hoover, the Associate Dean for Innovation in the Arts and Health at Hopkins Peabody Conservatory. She's a graduate of Yale and earned her doctorate in musical arts, not an MD, musical arts and vocal performance at Peabody. She's not only a teacher, but a performer and journalist. She was busy while away from Baltimore, did many, many things you can read about, but one of the interesting things to me was she founded and directed the Oyster Bay Music Festival in Oyster Bay, New York, and I'm sure you have some interesting stories about that. When she returned to the Peabody, we invited her to a meeting of the MedChi's Performing Arts and Medicine Committee, and it was clear from the beginning that she had much to teach us, and I look forward to learning more today. She's recently written a book, Music is Care, in Artistry in the Hospital Environment, and it's been very well received. She's had numerous roles at Peabody, one of which has been to advance initiatives that link to performing arts and health. She developed programs and curricula to prevent injury and optimize performance. She said she's been instrumental in creating programs with the School of Medicine. We are pleased that Peabody's first Bloomberg Distinguished Professor, Dr. Kris Chesky, is here, and we welcome you, and I understand he may say a few words for us later on. Together, they're setting groundwork to create programs to advance health in and through the performing arts, about which I think we're going to learn about right now. Dr. Hoover, thank you much for joining us. We look forward to hearing you talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Alan, for the invitation. I am so grateful to be in such esteemed company, looking together at the history of medicine in Maryland. I now live not far away from here, and I walk by this campus every morning and every evening as I go to and from my work. And I think about you all and the work that you are doing on a frequent basis. So I want to give a disclaimer and a confession, and then I'll get started. So the disclaimer is contrary to what my badge says, I am not an MD. I do not play one on TV. I do not intend to become one. As I said to someone earlier today, in the work that I am increasingly doing at Peabody on behalf of Peabody, I do everything I can to support the work that you all do, whether that's through having musicians on unit to help influence the environment of care, or whether that is working hand in hand with a multidisciplinary team to help solve the medical problems of performing artists. So I deeply respect the work that you do and the spirit of this institution. So that's my disclaimer, not a doctor. My confession is that were it not for a diagnosis in 2011 of a neurological voice disorder, I would not be standing before you here today. I would have continued in my career as a performer and a teacher of singing, a vocal pedagogue, a singing voice specialist, a community music festival founder and executive director. But life had other plans for me. And with that diagnosis, it became clear that I needed to step away from performance. And where it has led me is here. And I couldn't be more grateful for the opportunity that I've been provided at Peabody on working on behalf of musicians and dancers and their well-being and their career longevity, their clarity in understanding their roles as citizen artists, as well as fine performers. I've had the opportunity to do extraordinary work here already at Peabody, and this new chapter is no exception. So I'm grateful for this opportunity as well. So I want to start out by just saying that when I came to Peabody in 2015, I was immediately, thanks to the pair of Allens, one Allen with 2 L's and one with 1 L, that would be Sweetman and Jensen. It took me a while to sort out which one had a 1 L and 2, but I figured it out. I was invited to come and join this group, this esteemed group that had been in meeting for quite some time. And I included all the names of the people that I could decipher from my long ago email trails, from Joyce Duffy Bulow, I think was her name, as that group was meeting. And I want to acknowledge that the work that we've been able to advance at Peabody is really, we are very grateful for the work of Scott Brown, who you may remember, who is also a past president of the Performing Arts Medicine Association, and also to Ray Whitstadt, and all of the fine work that he and his team have done at the Hand Center at Union Memorial. And I hope that there will be more chapters in the future of connection. What I was struck by when I came to take a seat at that table was that it was this interdisciplinary gathering of physicians, therapists, music educators, performers, all of whom were working together to try to advance the health and well-being of the musicians, primarily the musicians in the Maryland area. Very inspiring to be a part of. And as we were beginning our program advancement at Peabody, very helpful to be connected to this community. So I want to just recognize before we launch into where we are at Peabody and what's on our minds. I want to just acknowledge that we do not do any of this work in a vacuum, but we are part of a community of physicians, therapists, music educators, performers, who are all working collectively to try to address some of the population health issues, which are so endemic to the profession of music making. So this is an infographic that we put together with Dr. Sarah A Hoover, whom you all may know from her association with MedChi. The statistics remain, even since the founding of the field of performing arts medicine in the mid-80s, the statistics around injury and career-ending injury remain remarkably consistent, even with advances in multidisciplinary medical care. So there are other problems at hand here that need to be solved. I could tell you how many times I've heard from one of our clinicians at Peabody or some of the physicians that I know who treat, especially musicians, if I just could have some say or if I could have some sort of communication with the people who educate these folks so that we could try to reduce the amount of injury before it occurs, as opposed to treating it once it happened and retreating it and retreating it, right? So while we've made significant advances in medical care and specialist medical care that musicians recognize as meeting their needs, seeing them as whole people, understanding their careers, all of which is critically important, that has not been enough to change a number of aspects of musical culture. So very briefly, I'm just going to whiz through some of this to let you know what we've been doing. We've been working in two different threads. The first being in performing arts health, which is really looking into fostering the health of our musicians and dancers as students and to put them on a good course, a good trajectory for when they leave their training. And so we founded with Hopkins Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation a clinic for PT and OT on site in 2018. And we've developed a number of different injury prevention curricular initiatives, some of which are co-curricular and take place during orientation, and some of which are academic courses. We have just begun a new research initiative, and you'll hear more about that. And with Dr. Kris Chesky's arrival, we have just founded a department in the conservatory dedicated to performing arts and health. And this is a huge step forward for us. At the same time, I've also been spearheading the ways in which we engage music and movement to support health and well-being in clinical and community contexts. So that all of our arts in health programs that we have developed that are student training programs, student co-curricular and community-based learning programs have developed out of this. So we have a lobby music program called Music for a While that our conservatory students are engaged in. And we have a bedside music program, which is run by professional musicians called Sound Rounds. And this, we are now serving not just East Baltimore, but also Bayview, Suburban, and I'm missing one, I don't think of it, in the Hopkins network. The primary team members we have on either side of this, our new Bloomberg Distinguished Professor is at the intersection center of all of these, as well as am I. We have a new team of postdoc researchers, who I'll say more about that in a minute. We will be having 2 doctoral grad assistants also assisting in Kris's research work, and all of the clinic staff with whom we intersect with on a regular basis are also part of the team on the performing arts health side. On the arts in health side, Kris and I are assisted by an arts in health program manager. Very, very happy to announce we just have a new person moving into that role who's stepping from oncology research nursing with 2 degrees in vocal performance and 15 years of experience as a freelance singer, is stepping into the role of our arts and health program manager. We have a number of student interns who help us, and we also have a growing roster of professional artists who are working specifically in clinical health contexts. So sorry about this slide, it's a little wonky. At the clinic itself, which is run, as I said, by Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Hopkins, we have physical therapy, occupational and hand therapy. We also offer free advisement sessions to any student who has a playing related or dancing related or singing related concern. We offer musculoskeletal and voice screenings, and we also provide backstage care during large, heavy performance times. And just a little snapshot of how many visits we've had. We started in the beginning of 2018. We had our slowest year during the pandemic, as you might expect, but the number of visits has radically increased over time. We don't think this is due to the fact that people are more injured, but to the fact that we've actually created a culture where people disclose and come and receive care for the injuries that they have, or the discomfort or pain which they are experiencing. So FY24 is 154 only because we're only in October. So we forecast that this clinic will continue to grow, and we will be adding additional specializations. Right now we have a dietitian, and we work with the counseling center. The Student Health and Wellness Center at Hopkins is also allied with this work. At Peabody, the student support and case manager staff help. We have constant dialogue between them and the clinicians to facilitate getting these folks treated and back to thriving in their studies. And in addition to PM&R, we have a growing interaction with orthopedics, particularly sports medicine. And also we have neurology consults with Alex Pantelia, whom you all may remember from when we came to speak with you about the founding of the Center for Music and Medicine. So I also just do want to acknowledge the significant work that Dr. Sarah Gray has put into developing injury prevention curriculum for our students to date. And that's something that we institutionally invested in. And I wanted to, because I know she is known to you all. And just very briefly, we have hosted one joint conference, which was a just emerging from the pandemic conference, looking at the impact of COVID on athletes and performing artists, and looking at the parallels between both experiences and trying to figure out how we could set everyone back up. You know, what lessons have we learned about the suffering of our athletes and artists during the pandemic? Of course, we both saw mental health issues skyrocket during this time. So going forward, what is our new normal with regard to caring for artists and athletes? So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn this over to Kris, who is going to introduce to you from his perspective, coming from a different orientation in the field, looking at this issue of, if it's not medical care that is the stumbling block to the health and well-being of musicians, what other factors are at play and who bears responsibility? So I'm going to turn this over to Kris at this point.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for welcoming me to this historic place. And I'm new to Baltimore. I've been here about a month and a half. And as exhibited tonight, the warm welcomes that I've received are just incredibly inviting, and I really appreciative of all your shaking of hands and introductions and all that. I feel like I'm in an esteemed place, although what's the deal with this ghost that's walking around here? I'm kind of curious about that. But anyway, coming from Texas, where I left the University of North Texas after a 25-year professorship run there, and the launch, I founded the Texas Center for Music and Medicine, which turned into the Texas Center for Performing Arts Health. And in the last few years, Sarah Hoover popped into my life and started introducing me to the opportunities here And I couldn't be more grateful to Sarah. I feel like I have a second crack at the opportunity to be a professor at another university. And so far, it's just been an incredible ride. Although I'm still waiting to find somebody who owns a boat. You know, I moved down to Fells Point and I'm looking at the water and all these boats. So if any of you happen to have a boat looking for somebody to take for a ride on the Chesapeake Bay, I'm your guy. So anyway, so I'm going to just go through a few slides just to give some orientation as to how I'm thinking about this challenge. I'm a jazz trumpet player by training. I was a Massachusetts raised person in Western Massachusetts, a highly musical family. Both my mom and dad's side, a lot of ethnic Polish polka music was really embedded into the fabric of our culture up there and the family. And I was afforded good lessons when I was young, and I was always a hot shot in the school, just one step ahead of most others, and graduated from high school and class musician, and I went off to a few colleges, graduated from Berklee College of Music with a jazz degree in trumpet, and been playing professionally ever since. Actually, I started playing professionally even in high school. And so I identified primarily as a musician. And so I see our challenges from that perspective. Then after Berklee, I played full-time in all kinds of arenas, all except the orchestra. So backing up singers and acts and jazz bands and dance bands and different orchestras like Lester Landon Orchestra. I worked on cruise ships, resorts, party band music, stuff like that. And then I went back to school and went to North Texas because they have a big jazz program there, got my master's, and somewhere along the way, I had a professor who introduced me to the idea of research and scholarship, got the bug, and I started to think like that. And then I did my doctorate. And for my dissertation, I studied the influence of music and music vibration on the pain reduction of rheumatoid arthritis patients. And then I had a couple postdoc fellowship projects, one looking at music vibration as a preemptive analgesia for reduction of postoperative pain associated with spinal fusion surgery. And I also did a study in San Antonio at their medical school looking at the influence on fibromyalgia pain. So I kind of come from the music world into the music and health world, looking at the influence of music on health. And then somewhere along the way, my former dean of this College of Music down there said, "Kris, you need to find a job now," you know, and I wasn't really thinking about that. So he gave me an opportunity to address something that most musicians know, but don't know how to deal with, which is we have zero education about health-related consequences of being a musician. So nowhere in my education from elementary school all the way through the doctorate did anybody ever tell me you need to be careful about how you make your music, because not only could it influence your hearing health, but it can influence your audience's hearing health and your students if you're a high school band director or whatever. The musculoskeletal stuff, the voice stuff, the mental health consequences of being a musician. And so we started our journey there, and over the past 25 years, ended up having a doctoral program, including a Ph.D. So I've supervised maybe 35, 40 dissertations on this topic, and leading me to this point in my career. So I'd like to just point to, I guess, a social behavioral perspective, which sort of highlights a little bit of how I'm thinking about this challenge. So we all know that any occupation comes with a potential outcome that can be harmful. In fact, Bernardino Ramazzini, who I'm sure anybody who's in occupational medicine would know is the grandfather of occupational medicine back in 300 years ago in Italy. When he wrote the first textbook on this, he recognized all these occupational maladies. And he told physicians, hey, you need to ask your patients, what do you do? Because a lot of problems they were showing up in the clinic with were related to their work. And in fact, in his textbook, he had a list of like 54 different occupations. And sure enough, there was the singer, there was the lute maker, there was the musician, there was the music teacher. So it's nothing new that medical people were able to identify these health outcomes associated with doing music. And we can see here, there's some common, very common things like stress or repetitive stress, but then you got some very unusual things associated with the occupations, like, for example, carpet layer's knee. You probably wouldn't get that unless you did that exact kind of work.
Louis Armstrong had a rupture of his apicularis muscle, which wouldn't occur unless you're driving a mouthpiece into your face every day, hours and hours and hours, years and years and years. So it's very unique. Same thing with the pitcher shoulder. And when I think about this, I kind of recognize that occupation, whatever it is, and depending on how you define it, I like to define it as all that you need, want, and are obligated to do, not necessarily work, but you occupy your time with what you're passionate about or need to do. It becomes who you are. It becomes an influence on who you are. You know, I have a certain attitude about this topic because of my lived experience. I have a certain physicality to me because I've been a trumpet player. You know, so when you do something like music, there's an embodiment of this activity that you can see. Like, for example, I played in all kinds of bands are really loud, right? So the more exposed to loud sounds, you know, a little cilia in your cochlea become damaged, right? It's just an expected consequence of that kind of occupation. Same thing with voice. If you sing, high stress in your voice, high levels, too much, you know, the expression of that could become some kind of melody in your vocal folds. So here I am, 1978, right out of high school, playing at the local Holiday Inn in Massachusetts. And when I look at this picture, it reminds me of what I started to see among my peers, among those who were doing what I was doing. You know, the bottle of Jack Daniels, for example, is a good expression of that kind of work. You know, you're playing in a place where people are drinking. That's definitely a risk factor. I can see the way I'm holding my trumpet. I can see the way my embouchure is formed. And I can see things that probably I should have been aware of back then. It would not have led to certain problems that I have now. In fact, some of you, I know you've got some hand people in here, right? So, you know, I'm a trumpet player. If you look at my hands, can you see it? Well, all these years of doing that and this has led to that. You know, look at my throat. I got laryngoseals. I got unusual, eustachian tube dysfunction. I definitely got hearing loss. But most importantly, have an attitude about why is it that people like me who get so drawn into this amazing art form don't benefit from knowing if and when and why certain musical activities present risk. So I'm an expression of a lifelong journey as a musician. So for a little more academic view of this challenge, this is, can you hear me? Do I need the mic? Oh yeah, people on Zoom, sorry, okay. I'm a trumpet player, so I usually don't even need a mic, but anyway, if you look at this big black line in the middle, think about that sort of as a river. This is like a metaphor looking at the stream of causation through a river metaphor. And so at the left side, it's early in life, and the right side is the end of life. And along the way, you become embodied with the consequences of what you're doing. And that can show up in different ways. And we call that below the water line. You can see that there's different layers, manifestation of these outcomes. And then you have both constraints and opportunities built into social structures, which are represented above the water line, ranging from, you know, your family, your peers, things like schools and accrediting bodies and organizations at the federal level, and perhaps even international associations like the World Health Organization, which steer our behaviors, our social behaviors. In fact, the World Health Organization right now, which has a working group that I'm part of, that's really concerned about the increasing prevalence rates among kids with music-induced hearing disorders because of the excessive cell phone and earbud use. You know, my dad's generation, blue collar, worked in factories, a lot of hearing loss, and perhaps that kind of hearing loss is being diminished over time because of changes in work patterns. But now you have something else that's possibly even exceeding those types of sound levels that we're not really thinking about, and is tied to music. So they're trying to influence government agencies, and hopefully things in schools will change, and we need to create some opportunities for people to learn and possibly even constrain our behaviors to avoid health outcomes that are negative. For example, when you go to a school of music, like the University of North Texas, where I was, where we had over 40 ensemble-based learning activities. So these are classes that somebody would pay for, and they would go into the orchestra and they would participate for the semester under the direction of the maestro or the jazz band or the choir or whatever, right? These are classes. And when we measure sound in those environments, in fact, I think I have the largest database like this of anybody in the world, with like 600 different educational activities, 50 minutes in length, 600 of them, 50 minutes in length, 40% exceeded allowable noise exposure levels deemed appropriate by the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health. That's one 50-minute activity in the full day of a music student. And we know that because of the way we took these measurements and did this research, that the rise and fall of risk is obvious. One day it's not risky, next day it's risky. There's a lot of variability in these sound levels. And because we did it over and over and over again in the same room, just across different teachers, we found out that the levels are highly dependent, if not totally dependent, upon what the teacher is asking the students to do. So a direct connection between the teaching of music and the teaching manifested as a musical behavior, right? I'm teaching you how to behave musically, that behavior can be deemed risky without an awareness of the teacher, any competency built into the education or preparation of that role, by virtue of how that person was educated to have that job at a university. So there's no opportunity to inform the students. There's no opportunity to control it, because it's just not part of our educational culture to build in some level of competency to manage these activities. So ultimately, we'd like to see when a young kid gets an instrument for the first time in music school, that the band director, the private teacher is aware of these things and they're able to steer the musical behavior accordingly. For example, clarinet. Anybody play clarinet in here? All right. So if you asked a bunch of clarinetists, which we've done many times, where in your body does it hurt? Where do you have pain when you play clarinet? There's two dominant places that are identified. One is the right wrist, ulnar muscle in the right hand, and then the inside of the lower lip, because of the bite forces down on the mouthpiece, chewing into the lower lip. So when we did this epi study, several studies, we found out, wow, here are the real hot spots and concerns. And then we do the biomechanics research to find out, well, why is it that the right thumb is having so much pain? So we put sensors on the instrument. We start looking at the force vectors, and we can calculate out where the high forces occur in relation to the notes of the instrument. So our clarinetist is going to tell us what note is the most risky on clarinet. It's the one where all the fingers are off the instrument except for the thumb. So the vector is just straight up and down, and this is not natural for the thumb to bear this kind of force, right? So it's open G. It's the worst biomechanical note on a clarinet. And then you look at the methods books that a kid gets to start learning clarinet, and what's the first note they're introduced to, and they play over and over and over again. That first year in band is open G. And then we analyze the influence of a neck strap on those forces, an elastic neck strap, and we say, wow, they significantly are reduced. I mean, big time. And look, our clarinet professors endorse this. And we were doing this kind of research, and just to move further, I guess, distal from the immediacy of this problem into more of a social framework. I remember having a parent call me. We were doing this research in Texas. Texas, by the way, is a massive music education machine. And so his parent called me and said, hey, I read this article that you wrote about the use of neck strap for kids who play clarinet. I've been to several physicians. They don't know what to do. They're telling my daughter don't play. And of course, she's getting ready to audition for college. She made all-state orchestra in Texas. It was a really big thing. And she asked me, should I be using these neck straps? And I said, yeah, of course. If she came to be a music major here, professors would probably endorse that, not only for reducing the risk, but also to increase the ability to develop your technical expertise, because you don't have to bear the forces on the right thumb as much. So she said, great, thank you very much. A couple days later, she called me back and said, we have a problem. The band director won't allow my child to use the neck strap in the band. Yes. So where's the problem? Understanding where the challenges are, or trying to change the culture, right? It's a full range of issues that we have to address. So somebody, in fact, what we did do in Texas, which is really great, and try to do this here in Maryland, all across the country, is we got the Texas Education Agency to ratify mandatory learning objectives to be built into all choir, orchestra, and band programs that teach kids about hearing health, hygiene, biomechanics, voice health, and auditory health. Even though they're not, band directors and choir directors and orchestra directors are not doing it, well, because they weren't trained to deal with that. And most universities still haven't changed their teacher training programs to prepare people for that kind of work. But that's the idea. So when a kid gets an instrument for the first time, they can grow and they can become more active and hopefully get to a point where, like my age or older, and still enjoying playing without this kind of problem. And hopefully along the way can avoid having to see the physician, the audiologist, the vocalist or ENT, and or mental health practitioner. And the same thing with dance. So back to this model, one of the fascinating aspects of this model is that it extends beyond the immediacy, like I'm talking about, from the social and behavioral point of view, and it recognizes what's called risk factors, variables that capture aspects of the social structures that influence individual and group action. And here's where we have our biggest challenges: behavioral and cultural norms, expectations, the community, laws, policies, and regulations. In terms of policies, I was fortunate to convince and have the evidence to get the National Association of Music Schools, which accredits about 650 schools in the United States, to ratify a standard of practice, which now requires accredited music schools, they must fully inform all students, faculty, and staff of all health-related issues associated with learning, performing, and consuming music. A very tall order because we don't even know what those are in totality. But nevertheless, we have that built in, and we're trying to advance the details so that we can prepare students accordingly. The environment, the psychosocial hazards, and commercial messaging. And I'm just going to stop at the commercial messaging because this is an issue that's, I guess, front and center of my mind right now. Any of you heard of the 3M lawsuit, where the 3M is paying $6 billion in class action lawsuits because 3M was selling earplugs to soldiers that they knew didn't work? You heard about that? Okay. $6 billion, earplugs that don't work. Well, we have musician earplugs. And my research has unearthed that they don't work. And same people are involved. And when we did this research and we addressed this as academics, as researchers, we were bullied, we were sanctioned, we were threatened, cease and desist notices. In fact, the state of Texas received cease and desist notices because we are going against this commercial messaging that's really on the back of musicians who don't know any better. So there's a lot of snake oil out there. There's a lot of people that think they know what they're doing and they profess, hey, I'm an expert in this, even though there's a lack of training, especially in the clinical side and the educational side. So we got a tall order, but I couldn't be happier to be in this particular place trying to merge Peabody with the rest of Johns Hopkins to explore these issues and make advances. So thank you very much.
So you can see why we hired Kris to help us deal with this multi-factorial complex problem of really trying to change culture. We are invested in a large culture change operation and trying to build a healthy campus at Peabody that provides a model for how some of this work could be done. And it's going to be a big lift, but we're really excited about it. And I'll just leave us today with a we're moving towards a center at the intersection of arts and health, which helps people to thrive through music and dance. And what the conceptual framework behind this is that we fully recognize that music and dance can influence health both positively and negatively. And it's our job as educators and researchers and practitioners to make sure that people understand both the positive and the negative outcomes that can be associated with engagement with music and dance. So we're going to leave it at that for tonight. And thank you so much. And we look forward, if you have questions or comments, we're here. Thank you.
Enjoyed all your talk, and we've talked some about this before. I'd like to look at things on a personal level to each of your students. I would think one of the things we talked about before is the problem you must have with a student who has some show he has to do but has a sore arm and won't admit it. I guess athletes, the same thing. How do you get the kids to admit they have some problem and that might hurt their career? The other thing is image. How often do you see, and this again, you might be a psychologist, someone who knows she'll be a good singer if she only looks like Taylor Swift? How do you address the image problem?
We almost made it through the evening without talking about Taylor Swift. So to your first question, Alan, we are trying so many different ways to create an environment where people feel comfortable disclosing their circumstances. By having free advisement sessions, by having a clinic that's open most days of the week that people can just walk down to, by encouraging them to talk with their faculty, by encouraging them to speak with the case manager or somebody in student affairs. If it's a mental health issue, there are increasingly more platforms for students to seek advice if they are having a mental health issue. It takes all of us, right, to help create an environment where people feel comfortable taking responsibility, but also our students today are much more likely to say, you need to provide this for us, rather than this is all on me. This isn't all on me. I need support from this institution or from the structure here, right? We're looking at systemic and structural issues with much more clarity than we used to. And so I think that that's part of it. But it's a huge, huge undertaking. Some of this will be done. I think one of the things that I'm so excited about that Kris brings to the table is that if students get engaged in research, they're actually formulating and asking their own questions about what they wish they knew, what they want to know, what they want to understand better in order to teach their instrument, right? And to base that knowledge upon study of the research base and contributions to it themselves. So Kris has been in the enviable position of seeing influence on faculty coming from students who've engaged in research themselves that have yielded results that may run contrary to what the perceived or received wisdom is. So that's another avenue as well. Image. I also think in a number of ways we are in a better place than we were 10, 20, 30 years ago with regard to image and singers, because we are much, much more aware of the impact of bias in the fields, bias against any number of different physical characteristics, invisible characteristics, and we're much more sensitive to those culturally than we used to be. That being said, opera is increasingly a visual art form, so there are those challenges as well. So, we're trying to show up to lead some of those conversations, to convene conversations around these issues, and to try to experiment in all the ways we know how. One of the things we can do in education is to try to set up a different scenario, right, to the one that's happening professionally, so that students can test out and try things that hopefully will then inspire them to put pressure on the professional arenas in which they work. Right. You want to say something?
Yeah. Yeah, it's important also to recognize that the context is, especially in the School of Music, is not conducive to a student acknowledging that they have a problem. The history of being in an orchestra, for example, in high school or college is such that if you raise your hand or you complain something's wrong, the perception would be that you're not capable, you're not strong enough, there's somebody else that can fit your seat, that's not going to complain. But more importantly, the people who occupy the leadership roles in these environments, including the private studio teacher, they may have a prestigious job in some famous university or symphony orchestra, and they have a doctorate and all that. The training of that person for that role of being a studio faculty or a conductor inside of a music school does not prepare them to deal with these at all. There's no training, for example, a studio professor to function as a gatekeeper to a mental health clinician or a physical medicine clinician or an audiologist. There's no training. And there's also the sense that if a musician went to a clinician and the clinician said, oh yeah, okay, I can help you, but the origins of your problem are the way you're holding your violin or the way you're practicing your trumpet, right? Which hopefully will happen. That's counter to the culture in which the teacher owns the way the person is supposed to think about playing. And just like the teacher not being trained to deal with this, the clinicians, there's a big need for training programs for clinicians so they understand this culture. And you brought up sports. We have sports medicine, we have sports psychology, we have sports science, we have lots of NCAA rules that put guardrails around the activities in colleges related to sports. The basketball coach can't keep practicing the team, whereas the orchestra teacher does. They just do. Or the jazz band instructor, hey, we got a concert coming up, we got a recording coming up, I'm going to work you till whenever. And nobody, the cultural, the social environment doesn't offer the student the opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute, that's just too much. So we need training, especially at the doctoral level in our music schools, so people getting these jobs have some level of competency to manage these things.
We have a hand in the back, and I think we may be at time after that.
Well, work to protect you from excessive noise. A regular earplug that you might buy at Walmart or Home Depot or something like that, a foam earplug, does protect you. And the NRR, the noise reduction rating, indicates the strength of attenuation of the sounds that you would be exposed to. So if the louder the environment, the stronger the plug, it would be most appropriate. Now, when you look at what's special about the patent and the trademark musician earplugs, which are intended to be used by musicians while they're playing, the secret sauce or the marketing suggests that the levels of attenuation are equal across the frequency range of the musical experience. And the plug itself has a capacity to mimic the resonance of the ear canal, which helps lower these levels. Because when you stick something in your ear, you're influencing the instrument itself in a huge way. It's like putting a mute in a trumpet. You change the timbre because you're changing the resonance of the ear canal. So these the custom fitted musician plugs have a bored out hollow center, which is supposed to mimic this resonant issue. But anyway, the biggest problem with these plugs is that in the non-custom plugs, trademarked and patented as musician specific, rely on a testing protocol called the Real Ear At Threshold Protocol, the REAT protocol. This is the FDA required testing protocol before a product can go to market. And it's supposed to be tested by an independent lab. So 3M had an independent lab. And the senior scientist of that independent lab for years never disclosed that he's co-patent owner on some of the products that he independently tests. And as the architect of that measurement protocol knows that the frequency ranges that that test include does not cover the full range of the musical experience. So for example, there are 7 frequency test points starting at 125 hertz, going all the way up in octaves. And the 2 lowest frequencies are very difficult to assess threshold of perception because an occluded ear makes it very difficult to perceive those low level sounds. So pretty much there's no testing from 400 hertz, like almost half of the piano to the left is just not included in the testing protocol to understand how well the product reduces sound energy. Just not there. And most of the energy in a musical signal is that frequency band, clearly. So what we did to overcome the limitations of the testing protocols is to develop an objective protocol. They use a simulated head with a fake ear, it's called TMR, and set up a research protocol where we were able to look at attenuation characteristics of 233 discrete frequency bands, all the way down, even sub-audible levels, and just got a really great profile of what these plugs are doing to the sound. And sure enough, the outcomes show that there's a lot of variability in the attenuation across frequencies, which is confirming what musicians report in numerous surveys. Oh, it screws up the timbre of the sound. It just messes with what I'm hearing. So our objective research validated what the musicians are saying and exposed just logically that this is the wrong testing protocol for these kinds of plugs. Plugs intended to be used in this environment. So what we're hoping to do here at Hopkins is develop a new lab. In fact, the 3M independent lab, I think, is actually shut down now. So when I reported this research, it was a major pushback by the people who own this space, and it's a very small group of people. And I actually had a paper reviewed and proofed in a journal that was then pulled because the company said we're going to pull our advertising if you publish that. And we ended up publishing in another journal, and then that same journal published a rebuttal, which we published a rebuttal to that. It's just ridiculous. And I've been sanctioned from 2 associations because these people complained that I was coming at them when I'm just looking at this product as a researcher. So hopefully the School of Public Health and the NIOSH Education and Research Center at Hopkins is going to move in the direction of establishing a research lab so we can start to develop earplug products that are appropriate for this application. Yeah. Right. So I carry earplugs with me all the time. If I'm flying on a plane or I'm blowing my leaves with my leaf blower, or if I do something that's loud, or if I go to a musical event that's just inappropriate for human consumption, right, which is a lot of our musical activities, I'll definitely either leave or put these kinds of plugs in. When I'm playing on stage and it's too loud like that too, I probably will just leave. And I stopped playing certain types of gigs because my musician colleagues and the engineers they're not acting appropriately. And it's not to blame anybody, but the lack of training in those disciplines doesn't give them a sense of responsibility. Although the World Health Organization, we just ratified a standard for events and festivals, which focuses on the audio engineer role in mitigating the risk by keeping any 10-minute window throughout a concert under 100 dBA LEQ for 15 minutes. So that's one step. But now if you ask the question, well, how do you mitigate levels when there's no amplification? Like in the 40% of the 600 events I've measured at school, how do you do that? Well, that has to engage the teacher. So we take time series data within these events. We can look at the distribution of time spent at different decibel levels in the time as predictors of the risk. So when you get risk for sound, it's a one number after a runtime. And you can look at what happened in time as a way to understand why it's elevated or not. And we believe those indices, just like skewness or kurtosis, are the distribution of time spent. Like, okay, I just had a rehearsal with my students, and I could see in this data that I didn't spend any time playing pianissimo with the group, right? Well, pianissimo is one of the hardest types of music to play. It's the one that needs to be incorporated in education of musicians. It creates the best aesthetic outcome, but yet it wasn't part of the rehearsal. And even if the rehearsal didn't get that loud, it's a squashed distribution of time spent, which jacks up the risk. So what we've been messing with is automated systems to put into our rehearsal rooms so that we can use smart machine learning algorithms to learn over time the behavior of the teacher as reflected in this data, give them tailored feedback as to how to steer their behaviors. And then hopefully build into some apps or something so a student going into a practice room playing piano for 4 hours can also have this reflective look at what they did. Did it just start to go up as the years become fatigued? How much time did they spend at different levels? And they can learn and manage. So that's another area of development that I really hope to push here at Hopkins. So technologies to facilitate this issue is a really viable option. Just like a musician takes out a metronome, right? Or a tuner. Well, I'm not sure if my instrument's in tune. I can't rely on my own sense, so I tune it up. Well, I can't really rely on my sense of perceived level of energy, which makes sense because our sensitivity changes very quickly. And I've got data showing the musicians' thresholds change even after 50 minutes of practice in like a jazz band. Before and after they hear differently than they did before. Then the other problem is having band directors in schools that have been doing this work for 40 years, standing in front of marching bands and concert bands, and they're compensating for their own reductions in hearing sensitivity, and the bands are playing really loud. And the students know it, but again, the culture doesn't facilitate them saying, hey, teacher, I think we're playing too loud. So I hope that answers your question. Sorry about the lengthy.
Do we, is it time? One more question, okay.
I question that psychoactive substance. High profile people like Sato, who repeatedly was smoking pot a lot, and then the high level of resistance to die over. I wonder just on an everyday basis, how much radiation you have.
Yeah, the research literature on this is
Can you repeat the question?
so he's asking about, I guess, the prevalence rates of drug and substance use among musician populations. So there are some studies on this, but not that much. And from an anecdotal standpoint, I can attest that it's there for sure. And it's there in all musical genres, especially drinking and marijuana, LSD and psilocybin, things like that. I'm not sure. When I was in my 20s, I was more aware of that going on, but then get a little older, it's kind of like the culture that you're not hanging out with, so you don't know. But yeah, Louis Armstrong smoked pot every day. He ate a laxative every day. And yeah, he probably was affected by that. But I think it's important for students to be aware, especially if they come from a family where there's been addiction or alcohol use or something. They might have some tendency to fall into that problem area. In the guy that I talked about earlier who taught me how to play trumpet, he died of cirrhosis of the liver. And when I was in Berkeley, and it really shook me up. Yeah. In fact, one of the reasons I left just playing full time to go back to school for my graduate work is because I was looking at these older musicians, and that's what I saw. And, you know, if you're working on a cruise ship, for example, every day is a party, every night, you know, 1 drink, 2 drinks, you know, and then it becomes a habit, and then it becomes something you depend on. So there should be components built into the education of the musician, at least some discussions about these things, and clinicians who are prepared to deal with that as well. Then on the other hand, I heard about the psychiatric or the clinic here at Johns Hopkins that's testing the influence of right. We just had a discussion with the people running that, and they were telling me how important the context of this LSD therapy is. And then we got into the discussion of music being a hugely important aspect of this. And then, of course, I was asking, like, well, what aspects of the music itself are more therapeutic or facilitating the therapy than others? Is the pitch, the dynamic levels, the genre, is it self-selected? Is it got lyrics? All these nuances, and there wasn't very good answers to that. So that's another area to explore. Yeah, good question.
I just want to thank you both for a wonderful, wonderful discussion. This has been most fascinating to me as an orthopedic surgeon. I have treated various and sundry musically related and dance related things in the past. You brought up snake oil salesmen that, you know, we were all fighting misinformation and disinformation even today, but it is to be noted that MedChi was founded 225 years ago to fight misinformation and disinformation and snake oil salesmen. So here we are again. So gotta have a round of applause for everybody. Thank you so much. And as you go out, don't forget to stop at the museum and go look at the videos to see what's going on with that. And thank you very much for coming.